Hello, everyone. I'm Erica Bloom, Community Marketing Associate for Springer Publishing Company. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion on how to transition from practice to policy. I'm honored to introduce our presenter, Rebecca M. Patton, past ANA President and endowed perioperative nursing chair at Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing. This discussion will be recorded and you'll be able to view it again in a couple of days at springerpub.com/videos. Please feel free to ask any question in the Q&A section. And now I turn it over to Becky.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be with you today. I'd like to welcome you to today's seminar titled How to Transition from Practice to Policy. I actually like to think about it as how to transition from bedside to boardroom. And both of those are very critically important for us as a profession. But before we get started, I'd actually would like to figure out and find out who's with us today. So I do have one, we're going to have two polls today, and this is the first one. If you can please complete the poll. You can only select one answer, so pick the one that best represents who you are. We'll give you a little less than a minute to do that. Great. We have quite a few educators with us today, which is great to see. Hopefully you'll walk away with some ideas of what you may be able to do in some of your classes to incorporate policy more than what you may already be doing. So as we get started today, I'd like to acknowledge a couple of things. First of all, as you know, today is Veterans Day, and this certainly is a group of individuals who've made sacrifices so that we can enjoy the lives that we lead. I think our nurse veterans and those that are currently serving are the invisible heroes in our profession. And I'd like to celebrate them with every opportunity I can. You see, when I was the ANA president, this was actually an area that I spent a considerable amount of time on, focused on, was the military nurses. I spent time following our wounded soldiers when they landed in the United States, down to Walter Reed or Bethesda Hospital, and watch the care that they received. Or I even was able to visit our nurses in military uniform at Guantanamo and looked at the experiences that they were doing there. It was quite remarkable to see some of the things that were going on as far as the military nurses and what leadership they provided for us as a profession. The other group that I'd like to recognize today is obviously our nurse practitioners, celebrating Nurse Practitioner Week. That is incredibly important to us too, in recognizing the contributions that individuals have made in caring for the public that we serve. Both careers, whether it was a military nurse or a nurse practitioner, often brings me back to wondering how intentional is it that they want those paths? Did they know the outcomes? Did they know what would be the impact that they would make in their careers? And I actually think it's a good starting point for us to begin our discussion today, talking about vision, recognizing the vision that nurses can have themselves in the careers that they take. So I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things today. One of them is I want you to write down that exactly that is, what is your vision? Where do you see yourself? Now, I have on the screen here a list of some remarkable individuals that I'm going to assume you know who some of those individuals are. And although they started out with practice issues, each and every one of these individuals, the work that they did resulted in policy solutions. It's a good starting point for us to look at our practice and think about what's the policy implications of some of the things that we see, whether it's a problem or maybe it's a better way of doing something. I know in having that vision, how critically important it is. For me as an individual, I've always known that I wanted to be the ANA president, for example. In fact, I talked about it when I went to undergraduate school. Can you imagine that? an 18-year-old bebopping around in the School of Nursing, telling seasoned faculty members that someday I was going to grow up and be the president of the American Nurses Association. And I was going to do it before I turned 50. And that's exactly what I did. You see, I'm a firm believer that vision can lead to outcomes. And for me, that vision, along with some of the strategic actions and steps that I took, allowed me to do exactly that. So again, I'm going to ask you, think about, what is your vision? Write it down. What is your legacy going to be when it's time for you to retire? Or maybe throughout your career, the journey that you're taking. Take some time, write the vision down, and then think about what are some of the strategic steps that, in fact, you need to take to allow you to do that. I believe that as registered nurses, we are incredibly capable of achieving those goals. This current slide here highlights just a few of the individuals that we all know, but I often think about the nurses that we never read about. Maybe we might see them on social media, maybe Facebook or somebody tweeting something, but there are so many other nurses that have made such an impact in practice through some of our policies. So what did these nurses have in common? Well, here's a couple of things that I know they had in common. As I looked at them and as I think about my own personal experiences, I think about these individuals. They had visions of what could, maybe on a local level or maybe even more grander than that. Maybe they saw something on a national or a global perspective. Their ideas went beyond what was currently talked about or thought. They didn't allow themselves to stay in that one particular box. Criticism didn't stop them from what they did. In fact, many of them will tell you how it only improved their thinking and incorporating some of the feedback that they got from individuals. It's the pursuit of excellence that really drove them, wanting to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for the public that we serve and for ourselves. You know, do we have the best practice environments for us to achieve the missions that we have? And then, of course, personal prestige really didn't figure into these individuals. Granted, now they all do have recognition and are able to acknowledge what their work was. But if you talk to them and even other people today, what they will often tell you is that's not why they started out to do what they did. It was really much more than that. So what do you have in common with them? That's the question, the second question I'd ask you to think about. On this list here, are there things that you can identify with that is a part of what drives you to do what you do? I know for me as the ANA president, it was really about the pursuit of improving work environment for nurses and creating better patient outcomes. And so that was always my driver, as to how can we do some things better. I also know that for many of us, you have to start somewhere. What's the starting point? And so I have this little graphic and this quote that I love. I've never had a little VW Bug, but I often thought that should be the car that I should drive. But, you know, Jackie Owens here, who's the editor of the online journal of nursing, I love her quote because there's so much truth to it. A lucky few will move nursing forward at the global level. Some may even enjoy that opportunity in the national arena. But each nurse, each and every one, has the chance to make a positive impact on the profession of nursing in his or her own backyard. So the question is, will you? And I would suspect that all of us have some ideas and in fact are capable of doing that. Again, reflecting on how I was successful, looking at how I was able to do some of the remarkable things that I accomplished in my lifetime or in my career. It started with looking at what was my personal capital. And now maybe you've heard legislators talk about their capital, typically after each election, and whether they win by a lot, they'll talk about they have this capital. The public has acknowledged that they are the select person and through their winning their elections, and they talk about their capital. I want you to think about your personal capital in these 4 categories: intellectual, social, financial, and political. Those 4 capitals, I think, can describe the nurse incredibly well in how we can be very successful in moving our agendas. I know for me, all 4 of these were areas that where I started at, I needed to do some work on to allow myself to be as highly effective as I have been. Now, Mary Wakefield, I think probably everybody on this webinar should know. If you don't, Mary Wakefield actually is one of our distinguished nurse leaders that served for President Obama for all 8 years at the Department of HRSA. And one of the things that Mary talks about is, actually, she talks about a lot of things. She's a great person to read any of her interviews. But Mary talked about recognizing the opportunities and using your influence to make the changes. She also talks about how never underestimate what you bring to the table as a nurse to health policy. And it doesn't necessarily need to be policy that we might identify as health policy. I like to think about there's health in all policy. And that's another way of looking at things. And again, that's a perspective that we as nurses bring when we use our nursing lens to help the public and other stakeholders and legislators or policy folks in recognizing where's the health in all of the policy. But Mary Wakefield would talk about the capitals and how you can use those to help influence people that you're trying to get them to maybe act on something that you're thinking about. So the nurse advocate, back to these 4 capitals, let's just look at where we're at. Look where you're at. And let me share a little bit of where I thought I was at and how I moved along this continuum. So the first one I think that comes naturally to us because of our education is our intellectual capital. We are experts in a variety of topics, but obviously things that pertain to health, healthcare, and wellness. And so it puts us right there ahead of many people. It also gives us the opportunity to help educate people about some of those issues. And we also have been recognized as being those experts in those areas. So intellectual capital is probably not an area that you need to work a lot on, but I'm going to give you some suggestions later on as to how you could, if needed be. Social capital is probably where Becky Patton stood out the most, and that is creating a network of supporters, making friends. And often what I would do is I would show up early at meetings. I would always sit in the back of the room so that as people came into the meetings that I wanted to meet or be introduced to, it was easy for me to jump up and talk to them, get my picture taken with them. I have quite the gallery of who's who pictures with Becky in my early career. Now it's kind of funny. People want their pictures with me. So the social capital for some nurses is incredibly hard. If you are more of the introvert type of person, meeting people, shaking hands, introducing yourself, or as I like to call it, working the crowd, is not an easy thing for you to do, but it is something that you can overcome. It's no more challenging than going into a patient room for the first time and introducing yourself to that patient. Building the financial capital is probably another area that nurses somewhat have a little bit of a challenge with, although it doesn't have to be. Financial capital is your investment into the issue that you're working on. So it may be a matter of writing a check to somebody's campaign, whether it's a person or an issue, contributing to the PACs that help elect the candidates that we support as a profession, or your time, investing your time in your professional association, investing your time on the issues. One of the things that I used to love to do because it was easy and it was very valuable is that I would work with candidates by either, stuffing envelopes when we used to mail things, or leafleting people's homes and dropping off things. I know my time was incredibly valuable to those causes and to those organizations. So financial capital isn't just about dollars, it's about resources. The last one then here is building your political capital. And I think for some individuals, this can be challenging. Part of it is learning what that process is. What is the political process for the issues? Who are the stakeholders? Who do you need to influence? Who do you need to get in front of? But to be a strong nurse advocate, these four capitals, I think, are things that I'd want you to think about. And in fact, we will have a poll in a few minutes as to how you would rate yourself. So here is another listing as to some of these things that you could, in fact, check off. The other part of intellectual capital is your knowledge about civics. You know, in today's society, many educational programs in high school or junior high school, they no longer include civics. And so there's a fair amount of knowledge gap for individuals today understanding that civics process. I actually administer a naturalized American citizens test to my health policy classes. And it's kind of disappointing to see how many people really don't know United States government, the three branches and the roles that they play there. So there's actually, and later on, we'll talk a little bit about the textbook that I have that even goes even further and deeper into these areas as to how you would rate yourself into these four capitals: intellectual, social, political, and financial. Political also is, you know, getting to know your legislators or the stakeholders, individuals that potentially will be moving an issue or acting on an issue. And so just meeting legislators, communicating with legislators. And I remember how the very first time I communicated with a legislator, it was my congressman. I was scared to death. So I called his office when I knew it was after hours and left a message because I was a little chicken to talk to somebody live. Of course, that's no longer the case. You can call the offices, you can send emails. There's a variety of ways that we can do that, and it all works. I think the other thing related to financial in contributing, you know, you don't have to write the big checks. Consistent small checks helps legislators. One of the things that I did in my early career also was I had the mayor's night at my house. Now, I don't live in a big house. I live in I guess I would describe it as a normal neighborhood. But the mayor of my community approached me and asked me, Becky, would you consider hosting me in the neighborhood so people could meet me before the election? And how can I say no to that? So what I ended up doing was we had a hot fudge sundae event in my backyard. It was a hit. Almost every neighbor came with their kids and gave the mayor a great opportunity to meet people. Still today, 30 years later, she and I still have a relationship and connection in which we continue to help each other. So let's do this poll now. I'd like you to pick one of the capitals that you feel you need to develop the most. And let's just see if my assessment is on target. So just select one of these in the area that you feel you need to develop more: intellectual, social, political, or financial. We'll have the answer here in 1 second, one hot second. And there we go. Pretty much what I thought. We all excel in that intellectual area. It's the other three, and even the political area there. So we'll talk a little more about that. And particularly if you have some questions later on, we can potentially have some time to go through those too. Let me close the poll here so we can keep going. So how can you build some of your capital? This slide is just to sort of give you some ideas. I know for me early on, I had a policy buddy. She really dragged me along more than I dragged her along initially, and allowed me then to become more comfortable with understanding how this all worked. But belonging to your professional associations is also a critical aspect of that. You'll find like-minded individuals. You'll have common issues that whether the association or you as individuals will be able to work on it together. The advocacy workshops that exist for us, there are many of them out there. One of my personal favorites is known as NIWI, N-I-W-I, Nurses in Washington Internship. It's hosted once a year in the spring. It's relatively inexpensive. It's 3 days. You go up on the Hill, you meet with your legislators, and you walk away feeling like you've accomplished something, not only in meeting with your legislators, but also understanding the process. So building capital is not a challenge. Again, I think as nurses, we can accomplish anything we put our minds to, and this is just one example. So I have this slide here with myself and President Obama. It's something I'm extremely proud of because I think after the Affordable Care Act was passed, it created the opportunity for nurses to be more engaged in the policy arena. The ACA really changed that, along with the Future of Nursing report. We emerged as a significant component. And so let's not waste that opportunity. Let's build on what we have. And this is really the challenge for you. This is the call to action for you. This photo was actually taken at the day that the Affordable Care Act was signed into law. I was invited as president of the American Nurses Association and literally had a front row seat to the event. Now, how cool is that? Very symbolic, I thought. As healthcare providers, we have the front row seat, and we had the front row seat to that event. So all of this will allow us to expand policy. I also put on this slide the icon there for Nurses on Boards Coalition. Please write that down. If you're not already a part of that or have your profile on the Nurses on Boards Coalition, fill it out. It doesn't take long. This is really our one of our avenues, one of our strategic initiatives as a profession to get nurses on boards where we can influence and make decisions and help, again, achieve a healthier nation, a healthier world. But expanding the policy, here are some of the activities. For those educators that are a part of today's webinar, any one of these are great assignments for students. And what they gain out of it and learning that process is, I think, valuable. It starts with voting. I think that's the other thing about building your capital and building your influence in policy, and that is voting. We have a challenge in the United States related to this. I think we also have a challenge among our profession in knowing that people don't understand the issues. And so these are 3 sites that people, in fact, can become more informed about the issues, and then vote and take people with you. Take people to the polls, help educate other nurses where you work as to what are the issues that we need to be supporting. Again, I thought another picture here, this is President Obama where he came to one of my meetings that I invited him to. And it was after the Affordable Care Act, after all that back and forth. And Margaret Mead, one of my favorite individuals to quote, and this is really speaking to us, never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that has. Our profession played a crucial role in 2010 in getting the Affordable Care Act created and then passed. And I think that's also one of our success stories that we should talk about. It's not a perfect piece of legislation. I'll be the first to tell you that, but it clearly did give us opportunities to address the health of our nation. A couple of more short action, long action steps that you can take to help improve and increase your social, financial, and political capital. Each and every one of these will take you a step up. It's a step up. It's a step up. I know for me, in going on my journey from wanting to be the ANA president, I started at my local district office, first by attending, again, sitting in the back of the room, looking at who were the major movers and shakers. the next time I went to that meeting, I sat at that table where that individual was at, introduced myself, and got to know those individuals. It's building your social capital. Many, many, many more activities. So you'll be able to look at these slides when the program is over. I hope you take some of these and then let me know how these work out for you. I'd be curious to know whether or not you're able to do any of these and how you feel about them. So last couple slides here. This is really our responsibility. Every nurse has a role and a responsibility, whether it's you getting started or whether you're going to mentor somebody and bring them along. Our code of ethics speaks about this. Our social policy speaks about this. And the other foundational document for our profession is our scopes and standards, talks about our role to advocate. So addressing our practice issues typically lead to policy solutions. And so policy skills are incredibly important for us to acquire. So I'll take a break here and see if we have any questions or comments. I appreciate you being a part of today. I hope to hear from you. You can reach me through this Springer Publishing. I think the other thing I want to share before we do questions is just to let you know that this is the 3rd edition of my textbook that will be published the 1st of the year. And how this all came about was, as president, I recognized the need to help educate nurses related to the policy process. So it's 15 chapters. Each chapter is a step in the policy process. And here's the most important thing I want you to hear from me is 100% of the royalties are donated for an endowed fund for a nurse internship at the White House. That was one of my heavy hearts as president of the ANA, is I didn't see a nurse there in the White House. We got to change that. We need to have policy fellows that will help work and advocate for our profession there. So let me just stop and see if there's any questions and bring us back to a full screen and see what we have here.
Yeah, we have one question that is, since you were there for the bill signing for the Affordable Care Act, what was the most memorable experience you had from that?
So that was probably one of the emotional days that I had as the ANA president, because what was happening is President Obama was talking about the bill signing, the importance of it, and how it was going to be a game changer for us as a nation. And I felt tears running down the side of my face because even though I was sitting in the seat, it was really symbolic of all the nurses in our profession in addressing the things that they have addressed, making the Affordable Care Act become a reality and improving health for all. I mean, you don't sit there and normally want people to see you crying, and of course, you know, it was being in the front row was pretty hard to hide those tears.
Yeah, that's amazing. One question we just got was, what policy competencies have you identified as essential for nurses?
Oh, there's so many. Just this, I often will tell people our policy competencies, our skills are very similar to the nursing process. Identifying the issue. It starts there. That's probably the most crucial step of all of that, is being able to articulate and identify what is the real issue, and then identifying what are the potential solutions to that. I like Burdock. Burdock is actually the model that I use to help people think through issues, and then the competencies that in fact fall within his 8 steps of that is often a place that I will start with students because it's easily understood. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of the answer that you're looking for.
Great. What was the most challenging experience, either with the Affordable Care Act or just, in your career?
I think the most challenging thing, maybe the most depressing thing, was often being the only nurse at those tables, being the only nurse invited. Now, granted, it's changed since a few years. However, what we know is that there aren't enough nurses being invited or pushing their ways to those tables. Part of that has to do with we don't necessarily see ourselves at those tables. And so I can remember flying home. I had a 54-minute flight from DC to my home in Cleveland, sometimes being totally depressed about why are there so few nurses at those policy tables? We have to change that. And that's why I wrote the book, is let's educate nurses about all of that. You know, the Nurses on Boards Coalition is incredibly important. It's working. We have over 10,000 nurses that now have been placed and are a part of our force. Think about this. There's 4.2 million nurses in the United States. If we speak with a shared voice, there isn't anything that will stop us. So how do we get the 4.2 million nurses engaged? Starts at the educational process. I'm thrilled to see so many educators on the webinar today. We cannot let nurses graduate, students graduate, not understanding their responsibility and what the process is.
And so one of the questions is, how do you encourage more nurses to become involved? So what would your suggestion be for educators then?
So I think we can increase our involvement through our mentoring and our excitement and our passion. You know, when I do some of my policy classes, I have the best pictures, the best stories, and that's because of personal involvement. And so if educators are personally involved in meeting with legislators, just talking about some of those things, writing an op piece, writing an opinion column in the newsletters, in the newspaper, and showing the impact of that, it creates passion. I know after I teach all my health policy classes, there's a couple of students that are on fire and want to change the world. So, and as somebody just put up on the chat, our professional associations play critical roles. I think everybody needs to belong to the ANA and everybody needs to belong to their specialty organizations. I'm a member of the Association of Operating Room Nursing. Here in Ohio today or yesterday, we had testimony on surgical smoke in the operating room. So the partnership between organizations is powerful. And so for faculty teaching, I hope you're members of both the, your specialty organization and the ANA, because often both of those organizations will give you what is the current events that are important for us to think about and work through. I always go to my specialty organization, always.
Yeah, that's great. We have a few more questions and then we're going to close it.
Okay.
How do you handle political strategies and games?
Well, that's a tough one, but that was one actually I was very masterful when I was president of the ANA. And that is, I would often tell people diversity of opinion is what will give us the best outcome. And I used to bring people together for lunch, dinner, let's sit after the meeting and talk about, I want to understand what your concerns are, and not start off in a polarized discussion. Let's appreciate each other's opinion. Now, that works well among nurses. It becomes a little more challenging when you go to the other disciplines. But our profession actually has a very positive track record of working with other disciplines that, in fact, have commonality with us as nurses. And so, don't be afraid. It's about having that upfront conversation with individuals and finding what's the common ground. Again, as nurses, we have those skills, the communication skills. I mean, I go back to team steps in some of my policy classes to get people thinking about, some basic communication strategies that work. Proven.
Yeah. Last question, do you see a difference between advocacy and influencing? How can nurses be more influential?
So I do think there's a difference. I think influencing is a little more strategic and being more thoughtful and deliberate and intentional in knowing who are the stakeholders, who's ultimately going to make the decisions, how do you educate them? Advocacy has a role in that, in educating people, but influencing sometimes can be pretty tough. And I think the other thing about influencing is sometimes you have to invest some money to help educate and influence people about your positions. Our profession, not everybody would be in agreement with this statement. But in some of our national nursing associations, they have political action committees that help educate candidates and will give them some money for their campaigns. That's another way of influencing people. Sometimes controversial, but it does work.
Amazing, thank you. For anyone else who had a question, you can reach out to marketing@springerpub.com and you can reach out to Becky with any questions. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Becky, for this amazing presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Reach out. Happy to help anybody.